maps and other senators.
Okay, I like to begin on time, and unfortunately, we only have 2 members, but I'm sure others will come in. Welcome to the Public Safety, Transportation, and Environment Subcommittee of the Budget and Taxation Committee. Today, we are hearing 2 budgets and 1 overview, and we're going to go a little bit out of the order to accommodate the Secretary of Transportation. So we have Ms. Carrie Cook here to go over the Maryland Vehicle Administration's budget. Thank you, Carrie. Oh, and we have quorum. Thank you, Senator.
Just gonna share my screen here. Okay, thank you, Madam Chair. Again, Carrie Cook with the Department of Legislative Services, here to present the budget for the MDOT Motor Vehicle Administration. So you can see on the overview page here, the operating budget summary. In fiscal 2024, the budget increases 7.2 million or 3.2% to 230.4 million. And then on the PAYGO capital side, the budget increases 1/2 million or 1.4% to 35.2 million. And just a quick preview of what we'll be discussing later, the emissions inspection program underwent a proposed pretty major change that was later rolled back by the agency. And mobile driver's licenses are also now available for Apple users that can be used at BWI Airport, among other places. So moving on to the description on page 3. So MVA is responsible for licensing all drivers, registering and titling vehicles, issuing tags and permits, photo IDs, and other regulatory issues. Moving on to the managing for results. Exhibit 1 on page 4 shows ASD transactions. This stands for alternate service delivery. So what this is the percent of MVA transactions where customers are doing it without going into the branch office. So using their kiosks, doing it online, or other methods. So you can see here that in FY22, their goal was about 72.5%, and they did reach that at 74%. They have increased their goal for FY23 and 24 because they're achieving efficiencies throughout the agency, largely thanks to their Customer Connect system, which I will discuss in detail a little bit later, but they're just trying to promote as many transactions as they can without physically going into the branch office. That's improving efficiencies both for the agency and for the customer. Moving on to exhibit 2 on page 5, this is average cost per MVA transaction. So this is cost to the customer. You can see in FY22, the goal was $16. They went just a tiny bit over that at $16.16. In FY23 and 24, they did increase the goal just a little bit, and that is just to account for increased supply costs for inflation. But you can see that even with those expected increased costs, they are still well below the FY 2020 level, which was over $20 per transaction, again, just due to COVID-19 related cost increases. And the final MFR item is exhibit 3 on page 6. This is average customer wait times and total visit times. So you can see the wait time is the blue bar. So that's from when you check in to when you're served, or prior to the appointment only system, it was when you receive your number to when you're served. And then the red bar is the total visit time. So you can see here that it did decrease in 2020 and 2021, and that was due to the appointment only system that was implemented during the pandemic. So people were being served faster because they had appointments ahead of time. And you can see that it did increase in fiscal 2022. This is because of the rollout of the Customer Connect system that I mentioned. While the agency does expect that this will increase efficiencies in the long term, at the very beginning of rollout, it did increase the times just a little bit as staff were getting used to the system and getting acclimated with it. But they do project that those wait and visit times are going to come back down in 23 and 24. And they have actually already seen it start to come down a little bit. So moving on to fiscal 2024 proposed budget. This is exhibit 4 on page 7. You can see the vast majority here is that dark blue, driver and vehicle services. So these are all the costs associated with running the MVA branch offices. We also have administration and central operations. The VEEP is the emissions program, which I'll discuss more in a few moments. Maryland Highway Safety Office and insurance compliance and motorcycle safety, those smaller slices on the side there. And then Exhibit 5 on page 8 is the proposed budget change. So as I'm sure we've seen with many of our agencies, there is an increase in overall net spending and personnel expenses, about 3.8 million. There also are increased costs for operational needs, just increased supply costs due to inflation, things like the cost of the stickers and tags and photo IDs themselves. And then there is also some anticipated changes in the Customer Connect system. So we do see some increased costs for the maintenance of that new system, which includes a lot of different databases and softwares. But they also predict quite a substantial decrease in costs due to the efficiency improvements, both in reducing the amount of paper transactions, digitizing things, and also just increased efficiencies agency-wide through this centralization. So moving on to personnel, this is on page 10. So you can see here that there were no change in the regular positions. There was an increase of 1/2 of a contractual full-time equivalent. And as you've probably heard in the previous MDOT analyses, that's just some shuffling of personnel to meet agency needs within MDOT. And I also wanted to talk a little bit about their vacancy rate. So they do have 59.27 vacancies above their budgeted turnover rate of 5%. And the agency provided some helpful information on what these vacancies are. So many of their vacancies are these forward-facing positions that are working in the branch offices, customer agents, and driver's license agencies job series. So these have high turnover rates, and they are, as you can imagine, not very eligible for telework. So for that reason, people are less inclined to apply, as employees generally are seeking more telework flexibility, and it is a very large percentage of their total workforce. It's nearly 1,000 of their 1,707 PINs. So they are facing some difficulty recruiting for these types of positions. And employees that do leave, that turnover are often moving to comparable positions in surrounding jurisdictions, often for better salaries. So something that the MVA did to try to address this is increase the starting salary in fiscal 22 for all existing and new positions in these classifications. And in terms of impact, the agency notes that there are not a lot of staff available to train others and cross-training, which is going to sort of create a cyclical effect. And there are some occasions where customers that have made appointments for driving tests, for example, may have to reschedule or visit a different branch office that is not as tight in terms of staff. And moving on to the capital pay-go allowance. So this is Exhibit 6 on page 11. So you can see that the total pay-go in this year's consolidated transportation program is about 117 million. That's a decrease of 5.3 million from the previous program. And that is mostly due to the completion of capital funding for alternative service delivery projects, which is what I mentioned earlier, the kiosks and the other ways to perform those transactions. Okay, so moving on to the issues. The first issue is regarding the vehicle emissions inspection program. So the background is that previously the agency introduced some regulations that were going to extend the waiver period for new vehicles in terms of requiring the testing. So you purchase a new vehicle, you're exempt from the regular emissions testing for 3 years. These regulations extended that to 6 years, in addition to doing a few other things, including establishing these motorist assistance centers. So this has been in the works for a while. It was initially introduced last February. It went before the AELR committee. They placed a hold on it. The agency published intent to override. So there's a lot of background that you can read about in the analysis here. They were jointly proposed by MVA and MDE. So MDE did analyze the effect on air pollution, and MDE noted that these vehicles that were being exempted had historically a very low failure rate because they were new vehicles. They typically were not failing these emissions tests. But the AELR committee did express some concerns regarding equity and other issues that you can read about in a little bit more detail there. The regulations were final published on January 23rd and were going to be implemented on March 1st. Another reason that the agency wanted to implement the implement the regulations was because the agency needed to renew its contract with a vendor which was going to operate these emissions testing. So they put out an RFP and they wanted to get the regulations through so that the RFP could be updated. And one other thing that they wanted to do was change the agreement with the contractor to make it a per test fee system. So charge per test they perform rather than a flat fee, which they were hoping was going to reduce the cost to the state. So just moving on to the fiscal impact here, and then we'll get to the latest on what is happening with this. So this is projected revenue before and after the regulatory change. So by extending the waiver period of how long you have to test your new vehicle, there's a reduction in revenue because it's a reduced amount of tests at the kiosk and at the branch offices. There's also a very slight reduction in expenditure, and that is from a reduced amount of reminded mailers that the agency is sending out. So this chart here shows the projected revenue before and after these changes. And this is based on a number of assumptions, including historic figures on the number of new cars that are purchased that would have qualified for the exemption and this new extended exemption, the percentage of cars that typically do the kiosk test versus the office tests and other things there. So you can see for fiscal 2023, assuming the March 1st implementation date, they expected that it would reduce revenues by approximately 1.3 million. And then fiscal 2024, for the entire fiscal year, they estimated that it would reduce revenues by about 3.8 million. And then very recently, there was a change in this policy. So on February 10th, the agency withdrew the advertised procurement for the VEEP management and operations. And the agency noted that they are reevaluating the VEEP regulations to ensure that they are in the best interest of the state. So the current contract with the vendor that operates the program does not expire until September 2024. So they do have some time to figure this out. However, they did final publish the regulations in the Maryland Register, and the agency said they were going to take effect March 1st. So we just asked that the agency comment on the future of this regulatory change, including the reasoning for the policy change, final publish in the Maryland Register. And the agency should also be prepared to discuss if a new path forward will be determined by the March 1st implementation date and when the revised RFP will be advertised. The second issue here is digital driver's licenses. So this was something that the committee heard about last year. In May, the mobile driver's licenses became available for Marylanders to access on Apple devices. So with these mobile driver's licenses, the idea is that you scan your Apple iPhone or watch, and it only pulls data that is required for that specific transaction. So if you're trying to buy alcohol, for example, it's going to show your age and your date of birth and maybe the photo. And then if you're at TSA, it's going to show all the data points that it's requiring for that transaction. So the idea here is that it's promoting more privacy and that it's only pulling the data that you need in that specific instance. You also do not need to hand your device to the agent. You can just scan it, sort of like those tap to pay type of situations. Maryland was a leader in this effort. Maryland was the second state in the country that enabled these mobile driver's licenses. There was a bill that passed in 2019, which authorized MVA to do this. It is important to remember that this does not replace original identification that's issued by the MVA, so you do need to keep that on you. And the program is completely voluntary. There's no situation where they're going to require you to have the mobile driver's license. So as of December, there are 13 airports around the country, including BWI and Reagan, that do accept these mobile driver's licenses at TSA security checkpoints. At this time, it is not accepted by local law enforcement, but the agency is hopeful that the use of these readers will become more universal and it will be accepted in more circumstances. And I also just wanted to note here that, as I mentioned, Maryland was the second state in the country to do this and was a leader in this effort. So MVA is sharing their expertise with the American Association of Motor Vehicles. They're sort of helping to develop best practices that other states can use, and it is spreading rather quickly. At this time, about 13 states have either implemented or in the process of implementing these mobile licenses in some form, and another 15 are examining it either through legislation or formal studies. I have a little bit more details on the security concerns. It does require biometric security features, meaning either Face ID or that fingerprint touch ID to increase security. And in terms of the non-Apple users, there is a beta currently going on with Google Wallet that started in December 2022, and they are expected to continue the full rollout in June. And then the final issue here is just continuation of the COVID-19 impact. So as everyone recalls, MVA closed all of their regional branches in March 2022. They also provided extensions for numerous services, including renewing your license, things like that. And then starting in June, offices were open to customers with appointments only. While the deadline extensions have long been passed, the offices are still open for appointment only. So MVA notes that this has actually created widespread efficiencies and plans to stick with this system moving forward. Almost 75% of customers were experiencing a wait time under 15 minutes in December. And the average wait time in December was 9.7 minutes. So this is actually really helping the agency in increased efficiencies, and also in conjunction with the Customer Connect system, they have more capabilities, like people can check in from their phone, perhaps sitting in their car. They can also send appointment reminders by email, text message, things like that. And on the Real ID side, so this is the federal initiative to ensure compliance with the Real ID per the Department of Homeland Security. So on December 5th, the U.S. Department of Homeland Security extended this deadline again until May 7th, 2025, due to backlogs at state agencies caused by the pandemic. The original deadline for this was October 1st, 2020, but as you can imagine, this has been extended multiple times. Maryland, as statewide, has been compliant with the Real ID regulations since calendar 2011, so quite a long time. But MVA is continuing to work to ensure that individuals are compliant with the requirements. So there's two parts with individual Real ID compliance. Customers have to have a new ID, so that's the one with the star, and then also have all required documentation on file with the MVA. So as of December, 89% of state issued ID holders were compliant with this, and that is a 31% decrease from October. So they're still making good progress here. And this is just a figure here to show you those who are non-compliant, what they are missing. MVA does retain the status about each ID holder so that when customers come in to renew their license or make some other transaction, they can let them know what they're missing and help bring them into compliance with this. And I also did just want to know that note that Maryland's individual compliance rate of 89% remains well above the national average, which was about 52%, still quite low, released in June by the Department of Homeland Security. And then in terms of the recommended actions, DLS recommends concurring with the governor's allowance on both the operating budget and PAYGO capital budget side. And that concludes my formal presentation. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Carrie. Thorough as always. Questions for our analyst? Okay, seeing none, we have acting secretary just for probably one more day. And Administrator of MVA, Ms. Christine Neiser, and however you'd like to begin.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Chair Alford and members of the committee. For the record, I am Paul Wiedefeld, Acting Secretary of Maryland Department of Transportation. It's a pleasure to be here again before you. I'd like to again thank the LS analysts for a fantastic job and very thorough. At M.MVA, we're dedicated to providing Marylanders with the best customer service possible. The MVA has made tremendous strides in improving customer service. Where just last week, more than 92% of the customers completed their transactions within 15 minutes of their appointment time. And the statewide average wait time last week was 4.5 minutes, which is really, really good. I'm proud to work with M.MBA. I'm proud of the accomplishments they made in 2022 and look forward to their continued success. So I would like to introduce the MBA Administrator, Christine Neiser, who will give a short summary of the MBA programs and will address budget issues and recommendations.
Thank you, Acting Secretary Wiedefeld, and good afternoon, Chairman Elfreth and members of the committee. It's my pleasure to be here. Again, for the record, my name is Chrissy Neiser, Administrator of M.MBA. I again want to add my thanks to Carrie Cook for her thorough review. During FY22, M.MBA introduced the final phase of our award-winning IT modernization project you've heard referred to as Customer Connect. And I really do want to take a moment to thank the legislature. The commitment to funding was a huge step forward for us. Not every state around the country has gotten that same commitment, and it's allowed us to do the incredible things that you've heard about today. So thank you all for that. Really appreciated it. Since implementation, it's allowed us to move more than 60 services now online to a platform that we call My MBA. Today, nearly 1 million of our customers have their own My MBA account. And I just want to encourage everybody to sign up and encourage your constituents to do so. So for the first time ever, you can see all your correspondence from the MBA, any letter we sent you, the status of your license. If you're a commercial license holder, you can see your medical certificate and make sure you stay in compliance with vehicle emissions and all those important things. Nearly 3/4 of our customers, and that number keeps going higher. So last month we were at 76%. Alternative services transactions. In terms of our customer service appointments, we want to make sure we're providing that best service we can. We know that every transaction can be completed online. And so when they do come in, we want to reduce wait time and increase satisfaction with our services in the branch. Our operational environment with appointments for all transactions has really enabled customers to experience significantly reduced wait times. And I love that 92% of customers, 15 minutes or less. It's averages can sometimes distort what's happening in different branches, but 92% of customers I think is pretty remarkable. And the team continues, we were just talking before I came down, the team's very competitive, so they're striving to hit that 100%. For those customers who might show up at a branch office that don't have an appointment, I just wanted to let you know we do have a process in place. So branch managers and supervisors can facilitate them getting an appointment right then if we have capacity, maybe later that day or at another point that's convenient for them. So there's a process in place. That check-in process is very popular. They can do that right from a link that we provide them prior to the appointment. And we were surprised, frankly, how many customers, 61% of customers are taking advantage of that check-in themselves. So then you just go and sit down and wait for your number to be called. I also just wanted to mention, if you haven't been to our branch lately, it's not just MBA transactions. We've embraced this idea of a one-stop shop with the idea that customers don't really care what state agency or federal agency is providing the service. They just want to get the service from government that they need. And so now you can get your EasyPass transponder if you need to purchase that. You can obtain your fishing or hunting license with DNR in many of our branch locations. You can finish your pre-check if you need to go to the airport, or for our port employees, their TWIC background check applications. Veterans benefits is one that we're really proud of, that we partner with the Veterans Administration of Maryland to provide. As well as now printing your birth certificate. That's another one the legislature enabled us to do. But if you need that Real ID compliant document, you can actually get your birth certificate at many MBA branch offices. You leave with the birth certificate, which you can use for other purposes, as well as your Real ID license. So that's really exciting. If you have renewed your license in the last year, you also might have noticed something different, or you might have heard from your constituents. For years, we called your driver's license number a sound X number, so people are used to hearing that. There were certain limitations of that because it was driven by the first letter of your last name and your date of birth. There are also fraudsters out there who, frankly, had found the algorithm and knew how to be able to compromise it. With Customer Connect, we now issue a unique Maryland ID number. So if you hear that from your constituents, that's what that is. It also allows us, if somebody's number has been compromised, we can issue them a new number. So again, an important step forward from a safety standpoint. We've talked a little bit about mobile DL, and we are excited about being kind of on the front line. Again, it's about security. It's about you controlling your information. We know that that driver's license ID card is not used for driving purposes as frequently as it's used for identification purposes at this point. So how can we enable the customer to control that data and as much information as they want? We have over 130,000 users already with our mobile driver's license, and we think that that will continue to grow as we have additional places that they can use that. Real ID, we're now up to 92%. So in a few months, that number continues to increase, 91%, I'm sorry. So we're really excited about where we are there. CDL holders has been a significant topic of conversation. So I just wanted to hit on that. We've reduced the availability for skills test appointments. Actually, when I looked at the numbers from last week, it was one day. You could get a same day appointment for a CDL skills test, which as many of you have been involved in that conversation is a significant improvement of where we were just a year or so ago. We also were one of the first states in the nation to implement the approved federal motor carrier skills test, the modernized test. And so that is streamlined and enables us to be more efficient in our getting drivers on the road. We also have a departmental bill, Senate Bill 705, which again is about reducing some administrative burden while keeping important safety components in place for both our commercial license permit holders as well as our commercial drivers. Highway safety is also very important, and we really work very aggressively with our federal, state, and local partners to try to save lives on our roadways and reach that goal of 0 fatalities. To support them, we've worked with Maryland State Police, who are the data owners, to be able to provide more information publicly available, because you know how critical data is in order to make good decisions about how to allocate resources. And so there is now a fatality report, which is available on zerodeathsmd.gov that is updated monthly. So anybody can go in and see by county what the fatality rate and how the numbers are moving. Although we don't have final numbers yet for 2022, we did see a reduction in fatalities. We're waiting for those final numbers to settle as additional information comes in. But unfortunately, it is the same factors. So you see speed, impairment, distraction, and lack of that seatbelt use. We're supporting local jurisdictions to develop their own local strategic highway safety plan. And so if you have anybody that would like to work with us that we haven't already, we'd be happy to support that. There are also some federal funds available, and SHA also provides some funding available if they have adopted a plan. Before I conclude, I always like to say that it is so important to acknowledge the hard work of our employees. We talked a lot about Customer Connect, but I always tell the employees, they don't remember a computer system. They remember that smile or that pleasant word that somebody said. They were on the front lines during the entire COVID experience and went through a system modernization, which is difficult during the best of times. And I'm just so grateful for the premier customer service they provide each and every day. I'll now go over the specific DLS recommendations and issues. So in terms of the salary increase for certain customer facing positions, so we were able in FY22 as indicated to establish what's called a prevailing wage. So the customer agents and driver license agents stayed within the same grade, but they started a minimum of step 3 now. We were able to do that because of some of the efficiencies we had in our own budget and support from the secretary's office, but it wasn't a change in grade. And so we continue to look to see if additional steps need to be taken. Certainly that was helpful. But since then, the District of Columbia, for instance, has increased their starting salaries. And as we've seen just nationally, you know, salaries, especially for more entry-level positions, are quite competitive. So we are continuing to evaluate that and have conversations. In terms of the second issue, in terms of where we are with the VEEP regulatory changes, as indicated, along with MDE, we're really dedicated to modernizing the program, but we want to do so in a way that's protective of the environment. And so we knew that there were questions, there were concerns about where the regulations were going. And so out of an abundance of caution and really wanting to be collaborative with the legislature and other advocates, we canceled the the RFP process that was moving forward. And we're now having conversations about where do we go with the regulations. So looking forward to that. I don't have a specific timeline yet because we want to have those conversations and dialogues, but certainly we're committed to moving forward as quickly as we possibly can. Any changes would first happen to the regulation, and then the RFP would be subsequently introduced. And in terms of the operating budget recommended actions, obviously we concur with both the recommendations for that as well as the PAYGO. Happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much, and congratulations on those wonderful customer service reviews. Really appreciate the hard work you and your staff have put into driving those numbers down. Senator Rosepep.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I served on the subcommittee 2 or 3 years ago, and you all came before us. and I was stunned then and I'm stunned now, that your vacancy rates are like the lowest in state government. You guys are obviously doing something right that other people aren't doing. So I'd really like you to talk about that, about what you are doing to recruit and to retain employees that we all could learn from.
Sure. And so I'll start off, thank you for the question, Senator, but I will say, our vacancy rate is higher than it has been in the past, and we're certainly committed to the governor's commitment to reduce the vacancy rate in half. That's really where we're used to being, frankly, more about that 4 or 5%.
I understand, but that's, you're still way below everybody else.
Certainly. So we have a very active recruitment process where we're constantly recruiting for our entry-level positions, so customer agents and driver's license agents. We are doing interviews with our leaders multiple times a month. So we always have a list ready. And then what we do is, because people indicate what branches they want to go to, so we have kind of like the on bench list, so that we know certain branches become available more frequently than others, and we target folks for those vacancies, knowing where they're interested in working based on, I'm sure, where they live. So we've created a process where it's just a constant, we get notice of somebody leaving and then we put somebody in that position. Now there is a little bit of a training period because it's about 2.5 weeks that our new employees who are on the front line have to go through before they're ready to actually serve customers. So there is still a little bit of a gap, even that position's filled. But it's something we actively monitor. We have, dashboards and monthly meetings, and staff is held accountable to the positions. The other thing we've done is, frankly, moved a lot of positions from administrative roles to our frontline roles. So, for instance, in IT, we've created a lot of efficiencies, one system versus, probably about 75 in our prior world. Some of those IT positions were reclassified to customer agents and frontline positions. We've also done that with some of the other administrative areas. So we're always, when a position becomes open, always looking to say, where should that position go? Not just assume because it's vacant in a certain area, that's where it should be. But I'm happy to share in more detail.
Well, mostly I'd share with the secretary and the rest of the agency and the governor, because seriously, you have been an R model. And you're doing something right that other people ought to be learning from. But just to follow up a little bit in terms of your own agency. So in terms of application, do you keep candidates on file?
So the applications are good for a period of time. I believe it's about 6 months. And then if we don't hire them within that period of time, then we go out and refresh the list. So there is a test that people have to take to get on the list. And then there's the interview that actually is part of the hiring process. But
you're continuing recruiting to add people to the list.
We're doing that continuously.
I mean, that's one of the things that I've heard from some county agencies, I won't say from state agencies, that they don't do that kind of continuous recruitment and keeping people in the loop. And therefore, they're not ready to go when they're ready to go.
We also do location specific recruitment. So, in certain areas, it might be a little bit more difficult to recruit employees. So in those cases, we do a location specific as opposed to the statewide recruitment, which are ongoing.
Sure. And one other question, again, on workforce, which is you say, the analyst says that there are about 1,000 of your PINs are in the driver license agent and customer agent.
That's right.
Which have the, on average, higher turnover rates. What are the qualifications and credentials to get one of those jobs?
It's very minimal. So you can either have a high school diploma or equivalent in order to get that. It really doesn't require extensive experience. These are entry-level positions.
Right.
We're really looking for people, many of this is the first professional experience that the employer really has, and we train them in everything they need to serve the customer. You do have to go through a background check. That's because it's a federal requirement for positions that are real ID.
Is there anything that bars you from hiring folks under 18?
We can certainly look at that. I'm not sure off the top of my head, but.
Well, here's the reason I raise it, is the blueprint for Maryland's future, this big education reform law we passed, says that by 2031, 45% of our high school graduates should have completed the high school level of a registered apprenticeship. And so we're going to need jobs for those 16 and 17-year-olds. And if you could change your rule so that you didn't have to have high school diploma, so you could have kids starting in high school, you'd have another recruitment pool and you'd have folks you could train earlier. So I'd ask you to look at that.
I will, yeah.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Madam Chair, just one other issue. I mean, part of this is Chrissy, to be frank. If you've ever been in one of her facilities with her, the relationship she has with her employees And that goes a long way, setting the tone. And it's something obviously we're going to have the other modal administrators focus on.
Thank you very much. Okay, your vacancy rate is good compared to other departments, but can you tell us about where you'd like to be a year from now and some of the obstacles or opportunities that you have and how we can be helpful and you getting that down just a little bit more?
Certainly. Yeah, the commitment that the governor's made to, cutting that in half, I think that is right on target. And frankly, where we historically have been more at that 4.5%, 5% rate, that's where we'd like to be. And so part of that is frankly, the review of the salaries. Our agents have very important roles that they determine if somebody is eligible to drive on the road and eligible to get that driver's license or vehicle title. And so we're committed to looking at that. We've told our staff that frankly, that we're committed to looking at it because they have many other options, as we know. And it's not just new employees attracting them, it's making sure we're retaining our existing employees that I worry about too.
Great, thank you. And then last question on the future of the digital licenses. Carrie mentioned that potential for this to be acceptable in more places than just the airport. You're obviously a leader on this nationally. Is that where the conversation is going? And if so, can you project out a few years? Where would that be? When would that be?
Yeah, certainly. It's very exciting. I think the next kind of place that you'll see growth is online. So there are many places that require confirmation of your license. So Airbnb and some of the, online places where you rent things, they want confirmation of that. So there's an international standard that's in the process of being developed. We believe that'll be completed by summer. Apple has already said that is the next space that they want to go to, is really this online verification. One of the other pieces that we think will be a growth model is physical places within the airport. So you've used that digital driver's license to get through TSA. There's a lot of national retailers who are now at the airport that you might be visiting. Wouldn't it be great to be able to use that mobile driver's license there as well? So that's another really right place that we want to look at. I do think the law enforcement example is an important one, and we are continuing to have conversations with them about what works best. How can we make it most efficient? Obviously, their concern is public safety, and we want to make sure we take that into consideration. But I think the number of use cases, frankly, are enormous, including, the state website and other state agency websites where it may be able to verify identity and ensure that that person really is who they say they are as they're applying for government benefits. We've been reached out to by federal agencies to see if we'd be willing to partner with them on some of these efforts.
Very exciting. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, thank you very much.
Thanks
Mr.
for
Acting Secretary.
flexibility.
Yeah, of course. And we'll see you tomorrow, hopefully with a new title. Okay. Next, we're going to take the Maryland Insurance Administration, and we have Samantha Tapia as our analyst. We'll give Samantha a moment. Oh, I am so sorry. Yes, you are correct. And I apologize. I'm sorry. Before we get into that, no, you're right. My apologies. We've one witness from the last budget that I neglected to call. Ms. Womble, I am so sorry. I had my sheet covered. No, it's okay. First time I've done that. Will probably not be the last time. I apologize. Please, whenever you're ready.
I'm ready. Good afternoon. My name is Can you hear me? Good afternoon. My name is Mildred Womble. I am the president of ASME Local 3655 for Maryland Motor Vehicle. I have worked at Motor Vehicle for over 30 years. I'm blessed. Thank you for the opportunity, Madam Chair and leaders, chair members, for hearing me today. I would like to take the opportunity to highlight just a few issues regarding motor vehicle. And this is from the employees that I represent. Although MVA testified that yes, there is staffing levels that are great. However, we continue to be at the short staffing levels. statewide. This affects the customers. And whether you know it or not, and when you call in on the phone, you sometimes stay on the phone for at least half an hour to an hour. That shows it's a staff shortage. The employees are doing the best that they can do. However, when you're in Customer Connect does not answer the phones for the customers. It takes a live person. Driver's license examiners, it tends to be a shortage. When you're in a position like that, this is a hazard job. You go out on the road, you pray that you come back in one piece. Especially CDL drivers. It's a retention problem keeping these examiners and some employees. The examiners, although Ms. Nizer said from $15 to, they increased it, there is a problem keeping the driver's license. They get the training at the CDL class in Elton and other agencies. CDL truck drivers, they make quite a bit. Motor vehicle, and the state is not paying that. We need all of that to be looked at, and we need people to be brought up to par. So we thank you today for listening to us, and thank you. We are not opposed to the budget. We are with the budget, okay? So thank you very much.
We greatly appreciate that context and feedback. I believe Senator Jackson might have a question.
Yes, sir.
First of all, thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for speaking to us today. And I'll just say what I say to most of our witnesses that come up. Please be sure that we have your written testimony. So that way we have it on record as we're going through the
Ahead of
process.
time.
Yeah,
No.
you can get it to us now.
I
But
don't have it written.
You can actually send it to us.
yes, if you could send that to us, it's very helpful when we're digging through the budget for that feedback, for us to be able to have it in writing.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right, will do.
Okay, with that, my apologies. Now we have the Maryland Insurance Administration. Okay, Samantha, when you're ready.
All right. Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the committee. Again, Samantha Tapia, we are going over Maryland Insurance Administration. Just a reminder, MIA's primary responsibilities, among other things, are licensing and regulating insurers, agents and brokers, and collecting premium taxes. Hopefully this is pretty straightforward. The fiscal 2024 budget increases by 2.9 million, or about 7.4%, to 41.8 million. And most of the budget, most of this increase is due to IT related increases, which I will talk about in a second. But the budget, most of the budget in general goes to personnel costs. And then along with the IT increases this year, and personnel is at 76%, followed by the IT expenses at 11.4%. The rest of the budget is occupied by fixed and operating costs, and an advocacy grant, HEAU advocacy grant. So again, most of the increases this year, if we look at the where it goes chart, exhibit 2 on page 3, are due to the insurance tracking system, the ITS system upgrade, which is a project main issue that I will discuss in just a minute. That is about 1/3 of the total increase. Other changes are also in digital infrastructure upgrades, and that is almost half of the total increase in the budget. So it's very IT oriented. The other main issue is staffing. And so MIA is at 32 vacancies, or as of our analysis, and I know the agency will have a response to that. We identified 32 vacancies, which is about 16.12 above the turnover rate. And there's been reported ongoing difficulty with employee retention, which they identified as related to salary competitiveness as a significant barrier to hiring and retaining staff. So we requested commentary on what operations experience the highest turnover and what the agency is doing to recruit and retain staff. Moving on to an MFR observation. So MIA conducts a review of every insurance policy and contract to ensure that all the legal requirements for the policy and contract are met. So we do receive data on the number of forms that are received and reviewed. The trend in this, just as an observation, is that while the total number of forms received is somewhat variable, the number that are reviewed is much steadier at around 90 to 93%. But moving on to the highlight of which is the ITS system. This was intended to replace the system that was built in the 1990s for tracking licenses, market conduct cases, and legal processes. It's also supposed to include functions for case tracking and in the fraud division. A contractor was selected October 6th of 2021. Oh, sorry, let me get to this. Contractor was selected October 6th of 2021, but they ultimately defaulted in March of 2022, which effectively stalled the project through the remainder of the calendar year 2022. There was some ongoing trouble with accounting for the project, which was attributed to an insufficiently staffed finance team. I understand that they do have new staff as of the summer that has been working on some of these issues. But we recommended, and then they said that they do have a new contractor that should be selected in February. They can update as well on this to begin work on the project again in March. We've recommended, as that is ongoing, we've recommended adopting committee narrative to request a report on the spending and progress history of the project and how they intend to track and report project spending moving forward. And then the analysis also includes a summary of the ITS project with a spending timeline summary. And then apart from that, we concur with the governor's budget.
Thank you, Samantha. Questions for our analyst? Okay, seeing none, we have with us Ms. Kathleen Bahrain, I apologize, Insurance Commissioner, and Tammy Longan, Acting Deputy Commissioner.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, members of the committee. I appreciate the opportunity to talk to you today about our proposed fiscal 2024 budget. My name is Kathleen Bahrain. I serve as the Maryland Insurance Commissioner. And with me today is our acting deputy, Tammy Longan. As indicated, we are the agency that regulates Maryland's $46 billion insurance industry. And our work extends from licensing companies and agents and other insurance professionals, assuring the financial solvency and soundness of companies, making sure that they comply with the laws that the legislature passes with respect to their activities within our state. We also do a large amount of consumer outreach. Many of you are probably familiar with our Consumer Education and Advocacy Unit and Joy Hatchett who leads that unit. As we look through the changes in our budget, as indicated, they kind of fall into 3 areas: the IT area, some additional personnel costs, and activities that we have really ramped back up since COVID. We're back up to almost 300 to 400 in-person events a year. And honestly, we have seriously increased the value and the attractiveness of our swag, because what we have found is that while nail files are great, little, sort of first aid kits are far more attractive in terms of getting people to our booths so we can make those connections and get them educated and informed and get them on our mailing list. So you all have the opportunity to learn about the Maryland Insurance Administration literally every month, because we put a constituent newsletter in your mailbox, at your official mailbox, every month. And we have a digital consumer newsletter that is relatively new. We've been doing it for a few months now. We're up to 30,000 Marylanders who subscribe to that. And it's a very popular item. So in any event, I'm going to turn it over to Acting Deputy Commissioner Hulongan, who has been in this role since early December. And who graciously, having been hired to oversee our hearings unit, but given her extensive experience in management and operations, bravely agreed to step into the acting deputy role on the operations of the MIA back in December. So let me turn it over to you, Tammy.
Thank you so much, Commissioner. And thank you, Madam Chair and members of the subcommittee. We are grateful to be here to address the Maryland Insurance Administration's fiscal year 24 budget. We are a specially funded agency, and none of our funding comes from the general fund. Our budget is funded by assessments on industry and filing fees paid by the insurers and insurance professionals who we license to operate in our state. In addition, the cost of our examination of insurers for fiscal solvency and for compliance with laws through financial and market exams are borne by the companies, which reimburse us for employee and contractor time expenses. The activities of the MIA do contribute substantially to the general fund. We collect the premium tax that companies pay on insurance premium in the state, and all penalties imposed by the MIA are directed to the general fund. There are no significant changes to the MIA's budget for fiscal year 24 in terms of scope, but we have increased our proposed budget by 7.4%. The DLS analysis breaks the increase down, as you can see. The bulk of the change falls roughly into 3 categories: IT projects, as Ms. Pack mentioned, additional specialized personnel and consultants, and consumer outreach. With respect to IT, let me focus on the Insurance Tracking System Project, or ITS. As the DLS analyst has recommended, that this committee adopt a narrative requiring a report on the project going forward. For context, the IT project was conceived in 2020 to replace an antiquated core legacy system developed in the 1990s by the MIA to track the work of certain MIA divisions. The project was awarded in 2021 and was kicked off in October of 2021. However, within 2 months, the MIA developed concerns with the contractor's performance and was alarmed when the contractor submitted a request to modify the contract and increase the project costs before it had completed the discovery phase or issued a work plan as required by the contract. When the MIA declined the modification in January of 2022, the contractor essentially stated it was unwilling to perform. We then worked with our counsel to initiate the process of terminating the contract for default, and in February of 2022, default in February of 2022, and the contract was formally terminated for default in March of 2022. The MIA then began to work with DoIT to rebid the project. In the course of those discussions, the project was adjusted substantially in order to bring all of MIA's tracking systems onto one integrated platform. DoIT recommended that the MIA moves to a Salesforce solution using the master contract. The MIA accepted the recommendation, and in the fall of 2022, DoIT requested bids from 2 contractors under the state master contract. The process remains with DoIT, which received the bids on February the 10th and is currently within their review. The MIA has been and continues the MIA has been and continues to meet with DeWitt Enterprise Program Management Office and this on this major IT development project, providing monthly updates on technical progress and project spending to our oversight project manager via the monthly assessment reports and DeWitt prescribes. The MIA has no objection to providing an interim report to the committee on the progress of the project. Although with respect to the specific bullet points in the proposed narrative, we would like to say that the MIA has been quite vigilant and proactive in identifying the contractor's default and terminating the contract quickly. The project spend has been minimal, consisting of approximately $80,000 in additional software licenses that are being used. Presently, the MIA is not pursuing a procurement, but is working through the state master contract in DeWitt and is managing this process. Unfortunately, the MIA is not aware as of yet of the bid amounts. When DeWitt has conducted its legal review, the evaluation process will begin. Throughout the project, the MIA will continue to provide DeWitt with the required monthly reports and technical progress and project spending. With respect to personnel, the MIA maintains its workforce and is able to readily recruit and retain employees to fill positions. However, the MIA struggles to recruit qualified candidates for very specialized professional positions. The pins that have been open for a long time are primarily pins that have been advertised on multiple occasions without success. We struggle to find qualified candidates for senior financial examiner positions where qualifications are set by third parties, for very competitive positions where the candidate pool is small and qualified individuals command high salaries, such as data analysts who are qualified to evaluate mental health parity comparative services, and for market examination and fraud investigation positions where the skill sets required are changing because of technology. We can no longer focus on the review of the files. We must focus on the review of algorithms and AI-driven automated decision-making. We are working to reclassify and reallocate positions. And in the meantime, we are using contractors and consultants to assure that the work of the agency moves forward. With that, the MIA would like to thank you all for your time and attention.
Thank you both very much. Questions? Senator Risbett.
Yeah, I want to follow up on the vacancy stuff. That was very helpful to give us nuance on that. Either you said or the analyst said that you're obviously competing with the private sector for most of these jobs. Is that a fair description?
As well as other regulatory agencies.
As well as other
yes.
regulatory agencies, I understand. So is compensation a material issue?
There are two issues. Compensation is absolutely a material issue. Just in November, I lost 2 senior people to the district who moved over in comparable positions at a higher rate. We had someone who the year before had done the same thing. Now they came back to the MIA because we had an opening in a more senior position and they actually liked working at the MIA. So they were happy to come back when the salary option was higher.
And so what salary ranges are we talking about? So they were getting paid X for you and X plus what with DC approximately?
So I would say that that position was probably in maybe the $70,000 range. They were able to make more closer to $90,000 in the district for the same position. So we've tried to go through now an exercise of, as positions come open, to right sizing them in terms of what the salary is, which also though then requires us to alter and change salaries for others that are in a similar position so that, you know, it's fair to everybody who's there.
So I'm trying to get a little more sense. The example you cited, is that a fairly typical example?
I would say that, you know, overall, and our numbers are a little bit different than the numbers that you were given. I mean, we showed 27 people, kind of maybe most of which are kind of routine turnovers, retirements, you know, people who, you know, are just, 4 or 5 people that retired in 2022.
Mhm.
And then we have people leaving government because, for example, they went to Harford County. Our deputy left to go to Harford County, and our deputy chief of staff left to go to Harford County government. So, but it's really, there's a core of about 8 or 9 positions that have been historically very difficult
Okay.
to fill. And those are chief financial examiner, where qualifications are set by the NEIC, and there's a handful of people that have those qualifications. So
And those are materially different from other jobs in the insurance industry in the private sector?
absolutely. Well, they're not different than other jobs in the insurance industry or insurance regulators' offices. In fact, every state is having difficulty.
No, I
recruiting those
I was
people.
really talking about the private sector versus the public sector.
So we have people that we train up as financial examiners and auditors and actuaries that then achieve a certain
get
skill
recruited
set,
away,
and they're
right.
able to go to a Merlino's or, a consulting firm or an insurance company at twice the salary that we can pay.
I got you. And what is the training and credentials needed for the folks in those kind of jobs?
So it depends on what the job is, but for example, a chief financial officer has to have a set of accreditations that come through professional organizations that typically require anywhere from 3 to 5 years of study in addition to experience. So those people are hard to attract. Although they tend to be quite long-lived where they are. We're working with the National Association of Insurance Commissioners to actually change, because these are accreditation standards. Your folks in these jobs have to meet
I see.
certain qualifications. So working with the NEIC to say, can we begin to change the qualifications so that we could have somebody with a little less experience, maybe he hasn't achieved all of the standards
Yep,
yet, but they commit to getting them within a certain
Yeah,
time
yeah.
of being there. That's a national conversation.
Good. Last question, Madam Chair, on this one. My impression is the insurance industry in general has a workforce problem.
That it could not be, you could not be more correct. And that's why we are actually have a task force at the MIA, which mirrors a task force at the NAIC to try to attract more folks into the industry. It's why the University of Baltimore Risk Management Program was created. It's why we're working with Harford County Community College and other community colleges to look at jobs within the sector at every level.
Okay, good.
of
No,
the sector.
I had that impression. I mean, I know that one of the national associations has created a registered apprenticeship program.
That is correct. The NEIC actually just implemented this year also, not just an apprenticeship program, that's part of it, but also to actually recruit people into some of these jobs that are like examiners and auditors and
Yeah.
actuaries, and fund for full 4-year scholarships for them within their states.
Well, I'd encourage you, given the Moore administration's interest in it, and the legislature's interest in it, to really look at apprenticeships in the insurance industry that may be relevant for you, but also relevant to the private sector. I'd be happy to work with you on that.
Absolutely. I'm very excited about that. We are doing really good work with Coppin. We have, and entered into discussions with them as well, and their innovation center to actually look at some of those more complicated jobs, both and as their students come, and we hire interns at the MIA. In fact, part of the budget increase that you see is to bring folks on board so that we can incubate those young minds and train them
Great.
early
Well,
on.
I'd really like to pursue this offline because it's a
Absolutely.
big industry and they're crossover skills. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for the presentation. You just answered my question about the internship. But I have a second question for you. Speak to me about your contractual positions.
The contractual positions. So the MIA has contractual positions in a couple of different areas. It's not unusual for us to have several contract employees, for example, in our consumer education and advocacy unit. We're a fortunate agency in that we have people retire that don't actually want to stop working, but they want to be part-time. So, we have 2 people who retired from their long-term roles in consumer education and advocacy, but said, I like being out there with the public. And so I'll spend Saturday afternoons, in one of the MIA's booths or one of the MIA's events, but I want to do that part-time. So those become contractual employees. Our former associate commissioner of financial regulation, who retired in August, has come back as a part-time contract employee for 15 hours a week to assist when we lost our director of company licensing to DC. But we also have where we've had to use contract employees have to do with sometimes some of the more complex areas where we have not been able to recruit. So for example, one of the things that the legislature properly asked us to do is to make sure that companies, insurance companies, are complying with their obligations around having adequate networks and making sure that mental health benefits compare with somatic care benefits. So the MIA engaged in a process that has resulted in mandatory reports being filed. That was part of the legislation that do very, very detailed, intensive, data-intensive analyses of those treatment limitations and how they compare. And it's a very specialized field with very few people that do it. We advertised those positions. We were not successful in filling those positions. But what we were able to do, mostly through the help of the Mental Health Association of Maryland, were to acquire PhD students and others who really have genuine expertise in this area. They would not come to be employed because the hourly rate that we can give them is more consistent with what they would be able to get in private practice. So that's where we are primarily using contract employees.
So Madam Chair, if I might, so you find that having a small contingent, relatively speaking, within your agency is beneficial to you, and it gives you the flexibility to do some of the things you want to do, like hang on to maybe a couple experienced folks.
Well, it is very helpful to us,
Or
particularly.
did this come about, I don't mean to speak over you, but did the contractual positions come about because of your inability to fill those positions? So I guess I'm asking, sometimes you may want to have a small cadre of folks that you can have, kind of jack of all trades versus going through the long drawn out process of bringing on folks at that level and then losing them because of the turnover.
So I'd say there are three buckets. So
Okay.
there are certainly some jobs like the ones I just mentioned that we just can't find anybody. And so we're using a group of people. Maybe they will fall in love with us and maybe we can reclass positions so that we can capture them permanently. Our current strategy is to actually go ahead and hire the inexperienced person and use those contract employees to train somebody up. So that's what's happening with the MIA right now in that area. There are some other areas where just having the part-time contract employee, often former employees, really works extremely well for the agency, and we don't have to split pins in order to do that. And then there are some roles where CEAU is a perfect example. It is a special person who is working with consumers in the field in that way. And so one of the things that Associate Commissioner Joy Hatchett has learned over time is that it's very helpful to take people and let them live out that role for 6 months. And then, so we have 2 positions right now that are pending conversion from those contractual positions in CEAU that will become permanent employees quite soon.
All right, thank you very much. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Senator. I'd like to thank your administration, your department, particularly my district experienced a tornado and a flood very quick back to back, and you were incredibly helpful to our residents and our small business owners during that time. So I want to personally thank you for that help. On the vacancy rate, I'm asking everybody who comes before us.
Absolutely.
You might have heard, do you have a number that you would like us to measure you by when we meet this time next year? And you spoke to some of the obstacles and challenges you have, and I appreciate the thought and strategy you have, particularly partnering with a COPN or other higher ed institutions, but where would you like to be next year?
From a percentage standpoint? So, 16% is high for us. I mean, that is really a rarity for the MIA. And there's some of the positions that we'll fill with the governor's permission that we obviously haven't, we have to have permission to fill. But I would say if you were to hold us at, say, 7%, does that sound fair to you?
That's ambitious and we would appreciate that.
Yeah.
Okay. And then my next question is on the IT side. First of all, congratulations on getting ahead of what sounded like a bad contract, because that does not always happen. Just so I understand kind of the process, because we have almost everybody who comes before us has some type of 30-year-old plus IT system. I don't know what we were doing in the interim, but now that you're engaged with Do It through that process, were you engaged with Do It at the first contract? What's the typical process, just so we understand when agencies go through an IT upgrade?
Sure. So I arrived in May of 2020, and by that time, this RFP analysis was well underway. And so our MIS department had already sort of scoped it. They certainly interact with Do It. Do It has to review the RFP. They have to approve the RFP. They have to, they're part of the evaluation process and the implementation process. So each of those steps along the way, when the RFP went out, Do It was involved. And then when we, for example, when we had our kickoff meeting on October 6th, the Do It representative was there as one of the participants in that, and they will oversee and walk along with us in a traditional procurement. One of the reasons we decided after this thing blew up was that it may have been a blessing in disguise. Because one of the things it allowed me then to do is step back and say, why are we still doing this piecemeal? And why are we building customized anything? We really need to be more customizable off the shelf. We need to be more nimble. We need to be more integrated. And we need to not set ourselves up for obsolescence. So we went through a really great process. My Special Deputy Commissioner, Corey Boone, who's right back there, helped lead that process through our state because Corey's been doing all the interim modernization. But what that really has allowed us to do is scope a project which we think is going to really enable the agency to not only enter the 21st century, but go well beyond that.
Okay, we appreciate that. Any other questions? Seeing none, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, Samantha, thank you. And lastly, we have the Chesapeake Bay overview, one of my favorite topics, and we have Mr. Andrew Gray to walk us through. And then we have a number of secretaries and agency staff and not enough seats for all of you. I apologize. Small committee room. Okay, Andrew, when you're ready.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I now present the Chesapeake Bay Fiscal 2024 Budget Overview. In terms of the background here, the goal is to get to, by 2025, to get to the 100% reductions in place to meet the total maximum daily load, or the diet, for the Chesapeake Bay. This is nitrogen, phosphorus, and sediment loads that will allow for the various water quality standards for the various sub-TMDLs that are out there. Couple components, the watershed implementation plans is sort of like our exercise plan in order to get on to that diet goal. You have your 2-year milestones, which is breaking up the work that needs to be done to make sure that we're doing what we're actually doing, or getting where we want to go before we get to those next deadlines. And then you have backstop actions that can be taken by the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency if they feel that we're not doing enough to get to where we want to go. And so far, they haven't necessarily exercised those, but they do have the right to increase oversight of permits, to say that certain new discharges can't occur, to condition how federal money is received by the states as well. In terms of the big picture, I really like Exhibit 2 here. It's the Bay Restoration maps, 3 maps showing on the far left the predominant loading sources for nitrogen. It's green, so it's a lot of agriculture spread out across the state, mostly non-point sources across the 6 states, the Chesapeake Bay watershed. The middle map shows our progress on nitrogen. This is the most important, probably, of the 3 components of the work that needs to be done. That reflects that the darker colors are the areas where we actually are kind of 75 to 100% of the work we want to do in those particular land river segments. And you see there's not a lot of dark areas, a lot of work to be done. And in terms of nitrogen loading, reduction remaining, this is the map on the far right. You're seeing here that through the Shenandoah River Valley up into the Susquehanna, up into the Lancaster kind of farming region, and down over into the eastern shore, that's where the majority of where the load reductions remaining need to occur. In terms of the big picture for the actual reductions for Maryland, you see that for between 2020 and 2021, we actually went backwards. So we were on a good trajectory. And then we had some failures at 2 of our largest wastewater treatment plants, Back River and Patapsco. And we also had a change in the Chesapeake Bay model, and it looked at agriculture differently in terms of the fertilizer inputs. It looked at in terms of livestock, and in terms of the best management practice implementation. And so that also negated some of the work we've done, and then therefore showed it kind of going backwards about 2.8 million pounds or so. In terms of the other lines here, our WIP official goal, the 2025 WIP official goal is 44.7 million pounds of nitrogen. So that includes the work that we're going to be doing for climate change purposes. However, it looks like if you look at the column just to the left of that, the 2025 WIP goal, that's actually kind of what we're looking like we're going to be credited. So we're gonna be very close to, because we're not doing as much as we need to do in order to get to where we want to go. On the far right column, this is the official percent change from 2021 to 2025. This gives a feeling by sector how much work needs to be done. You see the majority of the work that needs to be done going forward is in the agriculture sector, followed by the wastewater sector, and that's primarily due to the two wastewater treatment plants I just discussed. So once those are back in shape, in terms of their meeting the enhanced nutrient removal goals, then we will see improvements in wastewater, and then it'll be primarily agriculture we're kind of focusing on, at least in the short term. In terms of Maryland nitrogen pollution loads by basin, really briefly, the Western Shore has a lot more work to do, but that's really artificial. That 19% reduction that needs to occur on the far right is really reflecting the fact those two wastewater treatment plants had failures in 2021. Therefore, if you look just below that, the Eastern Shore is probably where a lot of the work is going to need to be done. It's in agriculture. Then in terms of the big picture, in terms of all the states, very confusing here. Little Delaware has the most work to do, but it's the least absolute amount. If you look just below it at Pennsylvania, the 20.4% on the far right column, that reflects the majority of the work that needs to be done for meeting the Chesapeake Bay 2010 or the 20 TMDL. And as we'll talk about a little bit later, that's probably one of the reasons why we're not going to make it. It's probably the majority of the reason why we're not going to make the goal, the TMDL goal. There are a couple issues, 5 issues we're talking about here. The first one is the comprehensive evaluation of system response. So everybody needs to check in every once in a while to see how they're doing, see whether things are working or not. This is the Science and Technical Advisory Committee's work to look at that issue to find out how things are going and where we need to go. The final report's not been issued, but the Chesapeake Bay Commission did have a meeting where a lot of the findings were kind of discussed in terms of preliminary information. A couple of things to note here. This is challenging. It's very difficult to get the nitrogen, phosphorus, and sediment pollution reductions that we're looking for. There are gaps in the modeled reductions versus the monitoring results. This is always interesting because the Chesapeake Bay model is really informing kind of where we need to go, but that's not necessarily always correlating with the monitoring. Some of that has to do with the lag time in terms of the pollution and other concerns. Non-point source pollution controls are insufficient, just not doing the trick. The point sources can be regulated. You can then have consent decrees, you can have fines, you can require various changes, but the non-point sources are very much a voluntary approach. Non-point source pollution controls are basically reliant on a lot of dispersed agricultural activity across Maryland. Maryland farmers are doing tremendous work, but unfortunately, a tremendous amount of additional work needs to be done in Maryland and Pennsylvania and the other parts of the watershed. Targeting is one of the components of a potential solution to this. Substantial load reductions in some localities are resulting in living resources recovery. This is the positive sign. So we're seeing improvements. Where we're seeing the reductions in loads on a local level, we're seeing improvements in the water quality and in terms of the living resources. So we are actually seeing benefits, but more work needs to be done. DLS recommends that the administration comment on the implications of the tentative findings from the comprehensive evaluation system response findings, and in particular, how spatial targeting could improve non-point source pollution controls. The second issue concerns the overall Chesapeake Bay Restoration Funding Report, or a big picture look at the funding. There's 3 levels are just kind of mentioned here. We'll talk about 2, the overall Chesapeake Bay Restoration and the Chesapeake Atlantic Coastal Bay 2010 Trust Fund funding. So in terms of the big picture, this funding reflects $150.4 million change between fiscal 23 and fiscal 24. So this is all the funding in programs that have at least 50% of the work that they're doing kind of related to the Chesapeake Bay in some way. This is a big number. It's over $1 billion in fiscal 24. The change between fiscal 23 and 24 for largely is for the purple line activities for Maryland Department of Transportation. You look down below that, the program Open Space Rural Legacy and Maryland Agricultural Land Preservation Foundation. This is a change in the transfer tax revenue. Basically, there's overattainment of revenue from fiscal 22 that's boosting the available money in fiscal 24. There's also general funds coming in for repayment funding from prior years, transfers for the Maryland Agricultural Land Preservation Foundation, around $16.6 million and $5.4 million for rural legacy. For DNR, $9.8 million increase, largely reflecting the Chesapeake Atlantic Coastal Bay's 2010 Trust Fund money, which is reflecting some of the general funds that still haven't been spent from prior year deficiencies due to concerns about the short-term rental vehicle tax the revenues falling during the pandemic. And then for Maryland Department of Agriculture, $2 million of that $3.9 million increase is due to the Maryland Agricultural Cost Share Program funding increasing from $2 million to $4 million. In terms of the Chesapeake and Atlantic Coastal Bays 2010 Trust Fund, so this is one smaller component of the overall funding, you see an increase around $13.9 million. On the lower right-hand corner, you see the competitive grant component is around $8 million increase. There's around $2.5 million for Tree Solutions Now Act funding. That's now general funds being put into Chesapeake Atlantic Coastal Bays 2010 Trust Fund. And there's around $1.2 million for new adaptive management and maintenance work. This is part of the Conservation and Finance Act from last session. And around $1 million for natural filters on public lands. DLS recommends the adoption of committee narrative requesting the Chesapeake Bay restoration data be included in the budget books, and for administrative purposes that will be included in DNR's analysis. And DLS also recommends that budget bill language be added, restricting funding until the submission of the Chesapeake and Atlantic Coastal Bay 2010 Trust Fund report. The third issue concerns the overall big picture look at spending for Chesapeake Bay restoration provided by the administration, section 35 of the fiscal 23 budget bill, restricted money until that report was submitted. A couple of highlights here in terms of three main sectors to focus on. The wastewater sector. So for 2021 is definitely a challenge with two major wastewater treatment plants having failures. Going forward, Maryland Department of the Environment does have a plan for holding the wastewater treatment plants and safeguarding our investments in enhanced nutrient removal to task. And that's important. It's a fantastic change to see that they're moving forward and looking at including engineering reports as part of permit renewals for significant non-compliance for plants, and also looking quarterly data for discharges from plants to kind of get an early warning feeling of, okay, is this plant performing well or not? One of the ongoing concerns, though, is sort of the softer issues of staffing in the wastewater treatment plants, and do they have good preventative maintenance plans? For agriculture, very challenging sector because a lot of its non-point sources is not regulated the way the point sources are. Therefore, there are many challenges in terms of, how do you kind of get the money where it needs to go? Because if people are only coming in opportunistically, then you're obviously finding a lot of the good, a lot of the people want to do the right thing for coming in, but you're not necessarily getting the work done in those areas where it could be biggest bang for the buck. The 53 new soil conservation district positions, which are now a year or two old, are going to help with this process. The idea being that those 53 positions, field positions, will help go out and write soil and water quality conservation plans, which would then translate into best management practices on farms, which then translate to reductions to help us get where we want to go. The question is, can we ramp up that effort to scale? And will we be targeting the money efficiently and effectively to make sure that that work is done where it's needed to be done? The final sector to talk about here is stormwater. The greatest challenge of all, perhaps, as development occurs, it's very expensive to retrofit for stormwater modification or stormwater implications or challenges from the past. So therefore, we haven't really focused our attention here, but going forward, this is going to be a bigger challenge as wastewater treatment plants get tapped out in terms of their capacity as the population increases. This is addressed in the past, at least potentially by an impervious surface fee, but that was not actually passed. The public-private partnership between Prince George's County and Corvius Solutions is another possibility for innovation in this particular area, but it hasn't necessarily seen the results we'd like to see yet. DLS recommends the administration comment on its plans for acquiring wastewater treatment plant engineering reports with permit renewals in its early warning system, whether the agricultural sector will adopt targeting to reduce non-point source pollution, what the next steps is for stormwater load reductions. DLS also recommends language requesting a similar report be provided with the next year's allowance. The fourth issue concerns the Conowingo Dam. So it's full and there are some licensing concerns. The state had an agreement with the Conowingo, with the Exelon, now Constellation, to address those loads. And the load concerns here is a 6.75 million pounds of nitrogen per year in a new Conowingo WIP, or Conowingo Watershed Implementation Plan. So everything was in place, the plan was in place. There was a proposal, settlement agreement with Constellation to then provide for $200 million over 50 years to provide for mussel restoration and other work, so fish ladders and other work with the Conowingo Dam in order to help kind of improve and sort of hopefully get us a little bit closer to our Conowingo WIP plans. However, that's been challenged in court. The license has been vacated that was issued to the Conowingo or to Constellation due to concerns about the settlement agreement not actually being something that can be approved by the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. Therefore, we're kind of back in the step of finding out, okay, so the state had a 2018 water quality certification for the Conowingo Dam. Is that something that will be approved or not approved? And my understanding is that the settlement agreement funding wise is still in place, but obviously that could be challenged if Exelon, now Constellation, doesn't feel that it's actually kind of doing, that settlement agreement is doing what it wants it to do. In terms of the work being done on the Conowingo WIP, there are a couple of components that are still sort of outstanding. The financing strategy from the other states. Maryland has committed $25 million for this purpose, but we haven't necessarily seen public kind of declarations of funding from the other states. And there's also a question about the targeting and accountability for tracking and verifying, of the best management practice implementation to make sure that we're getting credit for all the work that we're doing. So the $25 million has been provided for the purpose of doing the Conowingo WIP. There was a January 4th, 2023 item, Board of Public Works item that actually approved the Susquehanna River Basin Commission as our fiscal agent for this purpose. However, DLS has raised some questions about, we haven't seen the memorandum of understanding yet that was kind of in place for that purpose. The state clearinghouse review process appeared to have, was not completed before the Board of Public Works item was approved. However, this doesn't seem to be a major concern. The request for proposals process is a little bit vague in terms of our understanding about how that process will work. And the credit for projects is a little vague as well. In terms of the third component of the Conowingo Dam discussion, the sediment study is something that's ongoing. The question is, can you use the sediment behind the Conowingo Dam for beneficial purposes, for reuse purposes, and also help to restore some of the capacity behind the dam? There's $6 million in the fiscal 23 budget for that purpose. And that funding is around $3.3 million has been released by the administration, although DLS has raised some concerns about whether there's an overall plan for how that funding would be used and whether there's really any true cost-effective measure that's going to be come out of this in terms of that beneficial reuse. A lot of questions about the transportation of the sediment and the dewatering of it, and even the contents of the sediment, whether they're really useful for anything in a cost-effective manner. DLS recommends the administration comment on the likelihood the Chesapeake Bay partners will contribute funding to the Conowingo WIP, the details of the memorandum of understanding with the Susquehanna River Basin Commission, the request for proposals, and the crediting of nutrient reduction by projects, the status of the Conowingo Dam relicensing, and the settlement agreement with Exelon, given the recent court order, and the plan for Conowingo Dam reservoir dredging and beneficial reuse of sediment. The fifth and final issue concerns the lawsuits filed against the Environmental Protection Agency. So the states and partners sued the Environmental Protection Agency on September 10th, 2020. My understanding is that the last effective action by the Environmental Protection Agency, or by the kind of in the court process, was the plaintiffs, the states, need to file a motion to dismiss the lawsuit on or before February 9, 2023, and requires the EPA to reply on or before February 23, 2023. Concern here is that Pennsylvania has submitted its final plan, watershed implementation plan, and it's still not good enough. So the harvest is in and we are not saved, basically. So is there only 99% of the phosphorus target and 93% of the sediment target look pretty good, but it's 72% of the nitrogen target. So we're about 9.3 million pounds shy of the nitrogen target there. And there's some questions about the methods that have been identified by the state of Pennsylvania in terms of their plan, whether they haven't necessarily been approved yet either. DLS recommends the administration comment on the Biden administration's plan for regulatory oversight of the Chesapeake Bay TMDL and the implications of Pennsylvania's failure to submit a final phase 3 WIP plan that meets its nitrogen, phosphorus, and sediment targets. The operating budget recommended actions for the annual restriction of funding until the report is submitted. Unless there are any questions, that concludes the presentation.
Thank you, Andrew. Questions for our analyst? Keeping in mind, we are going to be digging deep into each of these budgets individually in the future. Senator Sulling.
No, I could talk about Back River. I'm not going to even go or Pepsico. But anyway, my issue, I think, is knowing that Maryland has put in sufficient funds to help this, but are we still trying to negotiate or work with the other states?
Yes.
And is this
I'll
ongoing?
actually take that one, Andrew, if you wouldn't mind. So yes, Senator, and I was going to tee it up in my opening remarks, if you wouldn't mind, unless you have another question.
No,
Okay, then I'm going to invite the administration up. I know we have Secretary Kurtz here. Secretary Addix gets a pass today. He's home sick. And I'm not sure who wants to represent MDE. And we have a representative from Ag as well. So whoever would like to sit in the second seat and we can trade off. So I'm just going to editorialize for a moment if the subcommittee would allow. For folks at home, Senator Gazzoni and I serve as the two senators on the Chesapeake Bay Commission. It's 2 senators, 3 delegates from every state of Pennsylvania, Maryland, and Virginia. So this is the part of our subcommittee budget that I know the best, and we'll be exercising that knowledge in the course of our budget hearings moving forward. I'll also say the progress that Andrew mentioned, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that much of that progress is due to the work of this legislature. And I think you can read between the lines on that one. I'm excited for the leadership of our new secretaries and this governor and a new refreshed and strategic approach to the challenges that we share. I'm excited for the new leadership in Pennsylvania, Senator, with their new governor, who I believe will have a renewed interest in the watershed. And I'm excited for some of the work that Pennsylvania has been able to achieve. Senator Gazzoni and I have spent a significant amount of time with our colleagues on the other side of the aisle in Pennsylvania, and they had a banner year last year in terms of legislative and budget focus on the Bay. And we need to continue that progress. So I'll also say that it's very easy for everybody in this room to point upstream and blame Pennsylvania for things. And in some cases that's due, but there's a lot of work that needs to be done in Maryland. And I'd like us to focus on that work. Knowing that we are moving the ball forward in Pennsylvania as much as we can. So with that, thank you for letting me editorialize, Senator Jackson.
That's a healthy part of life, so get it out. So at I appreciate the work that you all have done. And I represent Southern Prince George's County, Calvert and Charles counties. And we all share in this challenge, and we are too excited about the team that we have assembled, as well as the prospects that we see moving forward. And we're excited about it. And when we get to, I have a question for Andrew, but I think that you'll find with this committee, and the chair will continue to drill it home, not only on certain things, but we're your partners, and we are serious about this challenge that this legislature has taken head on, and we're excited about the steps that have been made, and we want to carry it a lot further. So while you can see the excitement in our chair on this part of public safety, transportation, and environment, but they all, if you're not good in one, you're not good in any of them. And that's a fact. So thank you very much. And Andrew, if you could go back to issue number 3 at the bottom, is there any forecasting on the stormwater? Down the bottom, it says between the stormwater public-private partnership between Prince George's and Corvus Solutions may yet offer solutions to the stormwater challenge. And I think we've talked about that for a good 8 years, if not more. But it says, but the results are not yet there. Is there any forecasting on that?
Well, certainly in terms of the municipal separate storm sewer permits, there's the requirements for where Prince George's County needs to be. So that would be, I guess where you need to be is sort of a forecast of sorts. In terms of their trajectory, I would really have to refer to the agency, but probably even more so to Prince George's County to see where they actually stand in terms of getting that work done. I know there's a stormwater report I can refer to, might be able to refer to offline and get back to you about some of the numbers, but unfortunately the data is a little dated, and so they won't necessarily tell you exactly where they are today.
I'd appreciate that, and I think the entire committee would, if I might, Madam Chair. From a forecasting standpoint, at some point when we make contact with our folks at home, again, I represent 3 counties, and I'd actually like to see it for the other 2 counties as well, because as the chair mentioned, we can point upstream, and we do that often, but we have a lot to be responsible for as well. Those counties that I represent, Tucson, Potomac, in the Bay. So anyway, thank you.
Thank you, Senator Jackson. Okay, and recognizing that we're going to have all your budgets in front of us and we're going to dive deep in all of them, Secretary Kurtz, why don't you kick us off?
Great, thank you so much. Madam Chair, members of the subcommittee, for the record, my name is Josh Kurtz. I'm Department of Natural Resources Secretary. I share the excitement that you all have for this issue. I know that our agencies are really excited. I think the term partnership is really important here. The partnership that we have as agencies with the rest of the cabinet secretaries, frankly, we recognize the scope and scale and size of this challenge is not one that can be met by one singular agency or without our agencies working really well together. So I think that's something that's much appreciated across our agencies and frankly, with the Chesapeake Bay Commission, with others. This is not something that we can do alone. And we will really excited to see kind of how far we can push these partnerships and this innovation. Today, we'd like to each make kind of opening remarks for on behalf of each of our agencies, Department of Environment, Department of Agriculture, and Department of Natural Resources, and then jump into answering a few of the questions if that works for you all. All right, again, Josh Kurtz with the Department of Natural Resources. And when we look at the Chesapeake Bay Agreement, we look at all 31 of the outcomes that are necessary for us having a restored bay. We've heard a lot about the sector-specific pollution sources. At DNR, we're looking kind of across the landscape of restoration activities that can go to reducing pollution sources or actually pulling nitrogen and phosphorus sediment out of the water once they've reached the waterways. All of that is grounded in science. So we manage the water quality monitoring stations across the state. We've seen some really good progress, and these are really important for us to be able to make management decisions based on kind of real life analysis of what's going on the ground. We also recognize that system can be improved. We've already looked into federal funding to be able to do that, to help us just make better management decisions, because again, grounding it in the data. The department also works really closely through our funding sources, the Atlantic and Coastal Bays Trust Fund of 2010 being the main one, with localities. I think we recognize that the work that we're doing and the goal that we're trying to solve, the solutions are going on the ground in every single one of our communities, and we take that really seriously. What we've been learning in the 2010 fund is that it's critical to work with people on the front end. These restoration activities, planting trees, doing oyster restoration, wetlands restoration has multiple benefits. And the more we can understand those benefits for the communities, the more we can solve problems and really build support for these restoration activities. We're also really excited about the opportunity to look for nexuses, right? Where we can get funding to tackle and build resilience in our communities that also results in water quality. So we are really interested in kind of pushing forward some of these targeting to help us really better identify those nexuses on the ground so that we can build better projects and bring in and leverage more funding streams than just necessarily the dollars that we have access to. With that, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague at the Department of Agriculture.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, committee members. My name is Hans Schmidt. I'm the Assistant Secretary for the Office of Resource Conservation at the Maryland Department of Agriculture. Secretary Addix sends his regrets. He is under the weather and didn't want to spread any bugs, so I'm here in his place. What I'd like to say first is that, and Secretary Addix has been saying this as he's been meeting with you, I'm sure, is that, to meet our environmental goals, we need profitable farmers. As you look across the watershed, Maryland agriculture, our farmers have done a great job in putting conservation on the ground. When we went through the 2018 WIP plan, the ag community was very involved in helping assist us with what kind of things could we put additionally on the ground. It was important to have their buy-in. If you didn't have their buy-in, we figured we probably weren't going to be able to meet our goals. But farmers enthusiastically, we went around the state, we met with them, they gave us their ideas and their thoughts. And we said, if we can provide you the resources, both technical and financial, we will help assist you get those plans, get those best management practices on the ground. It started with trying to get enough technical assistance in the soil conservation districts, and we were granted 53 additional pins. And as you've heard through the previous testimonies and so forth, hiring, filling those positions have been a real challenge. And it's been a challenge for the Department of Agriculture too. But we've gone through 5, 6, maybe 7 different recruitments, and we continue to go through those recruitments. And then we also have some attrition through some of our other positions throughout that we have within the department. So it has been an ongoing issue. We have offered incentives. We downgraded a few positions to help, again, get those positions out into the district. And to date, out of those 53 new pins, we have 44 filled out in the soil conservation districts, as well as on our verification team. And I'd just like to touch on the verification team because Maryland is very unique out of all the base states. And where we can go out, we can send staff out to look at practices that are on the ground that went, not only practices that went through our cost share systems, both through the state and the federal programs, but also looking at practices that farmers pay for out of pocket that we don't even have records of. And we've gone looking at over 20,000 practices out of about 32,000 practices. We find that over 70% of those practices that are 10 to 15 years old are still functioning. The difference being is that either there's a change in land use where those practices may not exist, or very minor issues that we need to address that the farmer needs to put on. But 70% is a huge number. Those are credits that we can get that we're not putting more money back in to put additional practices on the ground. So that's a huge savings for the states. We are meeting with our other base states. Secretary Addix has a meeting with their other ag secretaries on Earth Day to talk about, what Maryland is doing, but also looking at what they're doing. Our farmers are telling us when they do look at north of the border, why do we need to meet these regulatory requirements and those states don't? So we're having those ongoing discussions. I just came back from Washington, D.C. We had a 5-day meeting with our National Association of State Departments of Agriculture. And a lot of states are looking at Maryland, how we're meeting those goals. And Maryland, again, our farmers are very forward thinking. Maryland was one of the first states to have cover crops, one of the first states to have no-till. One of the first states that really implemented some of the biotechnology, some precision agriculture. So our farmers are doing the right thing. They want to do the right thing. They recognize that the Chesapeake Bay is huge, and we need to continue to provide that support. And Madam Chair, you're correct. This legislature really has gone to bat for the ag community, and we really do appreciate that. But as we're looking at whether we target watersheds or target counties, our approach is we're targeting our programs to make sure that our programs are reaching out to all sectors. It doesn't matter whether you're the large traditional farmer, whether you're the small urban ag farmer, whether you're an equine operation, or whatever it may be. We want to make sure that those practices, those technical and financial assistance that we're providing is working for all. And I would agree, we're excited. We're implementing some new programs, particularly on our urban ag sides, and we look forward to the future. And I'll turn it over to our Deputy Secretary, Suzanne Dorsey from NDE.
Thanks, Hans. I appreciate that passion and I share it. For the record, I am Suzanne Dorsey, Deputy Secretary, Maryland Department of the Environment, here on behalf of Secretary McElwain, Chair Elfreth, Senator Rosa Pep Jackson, Salling. Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to address you. And I think the theme of the day might be partnership. And I want to highlight a partnership that rarely gets recognized as we talk about Chesapeake Bay, but maybe the most important partnership that we engage with. And that's the human infrastructure that we as a state have built between our state, federal, and our local government, and our even down to our businesses like farmers implementing bay restoration goals. That partnership doesn't exist in many other states. It's one of the reasons why our neighbors in Pennsylvania struggle. They lack the partnership at every level, federal, state, down to the local governments, be it their MS4 permits, which you can predict out, are meeting our WIP 3 goals. They're nation leading. It's because we have build trust relationships with our local governments. Sometimes, like in Curtis Bay, we've got to work really hard to maintain those trust relationships. Sometimes we fall short, but we're committed to that human infrastructure to make sure that at the end of the day, we don't only implement Chesapeake Bay restoration, but we build a better Maryland for tomorrow, a tomorrow that has a different climate, that makes it harder to achieve our Chesapeake Bay goals. So I just want to start with that. That human partnership is the key to our success today in the Chesapeake Bay and tomorrow as we address climate change. Secretary McElwain has indicated that one of her top priority is environmental justice. So everything that we talk about in the Maryland Department of the Environment will have an environmental justice perspective. That comes with funding, it comes with allocating resources, it comes with rethinking permitting, which is also a key priority for the secretary. So as we move forward, the secretary has demanded that we look at the necessary resources. Yes, vacancies, but what staffing and funding do we need to have within our organization to ensure that the health and the resilience of the Chesapeake Bay is lasting? And that resilience pays us dividends as we enter a changing climate. What do we have? Do we have the resources to issue science-based and timely enforcement, which is a key part of her strategy moving forward? Do we have the resources to build new systems to make sure that we have engineering to maintain and keep wastewater treatments in place, the early warning systems that you've heard us talk about before? We do, thanks to you, contribute significant amount of money, $120 million to wastewater treatment plants. It's demonstrated measurable improvements, and we've got to make sure those wastewater treatment plants are operated and maintained effectively. It's an all of the above approach. Outside of MDE, we're targeting bay restoration funds to maximize pollution reduction, to increase resiliency, to do all the multiple benefits that we've been talking about. So climate change is part of the challenge, achieving our Chesapeake Bay goals. We've got to really incorporate not just how BMPs operate in today's climate, but how they'll operate in tomorrow's climate. I want to recognize Director Curry and Assistant Director Matt Rose sitting behind me, who have embarked on really science-based approaches to deal with stormwater management. So yes, our stormwater permits are meeting our projected bay goals, and they have to do more. So we recognize that. We need your partnership. We need open dialogue to ensure that as we take risks and try new things, that we're doing that with full transparency and full partnership. So with that, I want to just answer a few of the specific questions. Is that all right, Josh? Or do you want to start?
Why don't I start us off?
You
We'll go
start.
back. Yeah. All right, is that all right if we get into the questions? Great. I want to thank Mr. Gray for the thoughtful analysis that went in here today that we can respond to. And I want to start with question number one, looking at the comprehensive evaluation of system response, the CSER report. This is something we're very excited to have, and we're looking forward to being able to dig into once it's here. We've heard about some of the initial reports from the commission, and I think when we look at this, it really much is in line with what we want to do. We need to be better at targeting. We need to be relying on some of the most up-to-date science and up-to-date data sets. And I think that's something that's really exciting that's happened in recent years. You look at the forest data cover layers that came out of the Harry Hughes Center. These are far more fine scale, and fine scale data allows us to make better fine scale decisions. So that's something we're excited about with the CSER report. I think the bottom line on the CSER report is we can't wait for this to get here because we're then going to be able to dig in and look at every single one of our programs, our processes, and get a better sense for what is working and what isn't working as well as it could be. And we're committed to following that science once we have it to make sure that we're making the best decisions. On the second question that was raised, we concur with the recommendation, and we will continue to publish the Chesapeake Bay restoration data in the governor's budget book. I think I will turn the next question over to Secretary Schmidt.
I think I may have answered my question already when we talk about, targeting and so forth. I'll just add, to my other comments is that through resource conservation, our strategic plan looks at three key priorities. One is Chesapeake Bay restoration. Second is climate resiliency. And third is environmental justice. And we try to incorporate all those into our programs so that we can make sure that we are including everyone in all our programs. So again, it goes back to targeting our programs, making sure that the technical staff out in our soil conservation districts. We're continuing to look at those staff and looking at the needs within those districts, looking at the work plans of those districts and making sure that we're providing those resources, whether it's financial or technical service to those districts to make sure they're meeting their needs. And I'll turn to Suzanne Dorsey.
Sure. So I want to start in question 3. For the reporting language, part of question 3, we absolutely plan to provide that in our 2023 JCR report. So we will continue to do that. On wastewater, I mentioned that in the opening remarks. We want to make sure that local governments have the resources and the financial assistance that they need to upgrade and operate and maintain their wastewater treatment plants. We are focused on compliance and enforcement, so that will be an ongoing priority. When necessary, we are working on new initiatives like requiring plant and engineering evaluations and facility improvement plans that have consistent, especially for these plants that have consistent non-compliance history. And we're increasing monitoring to evaluate facility progress. We're also taking into consideration communities that are impacted by environmental justice concerns and tuning our enforcement to increase in those areas that may be bearing an uneven burden of pollution. We've got from wastewater, we've got early warning systems that we're putting in place. So a discharge monitoring report. So we monitor these reports and engage with plants that are off track as an early warning mechanism. So this initiative is starting and will be in place in June of 2023. Working really hard on that. And you'll also notice that in our response document, we have made good progress issuing stormwater permits that increase the restoration pace. And we plan to continue to incentivize the green and blue infrastructure, thanks to the General Assembly with the Tree Solutions Now Act that we've worked in deep partnership with our sister agencies and the Chesapeake Bay Trust to get trees in the ground year 1. We were able to do that last year, and I know some of you have participated in those events. On Conowingo, New York, Pennsylvania, and the Susquehanna River Basin Commission are already contributing to the Conowingo WIP implementation. And Pennsylvania is actually, after our leadership, setting a Conowingo set aside fund. So we're excited. We've already begun collaboration with Pennsylvania on that. The 25 million pay for success will be administered by SRBC and will ensure that upstream credits, nitrogen reduction, benefit our Chesapeake Bay the most, but also are the most cost effective and risk-free. So those credits and that funding will only happen after the credit has been verified using our standard Chesapeake Bay science-based approach for verification. The Conowingo settlement agreement remains in effect, though the FERC license and conditional water quality cert have been invalidated. The settlement is in effect, and although there's not a lot we can talk about there, we do expect to have news coming in the future as we work through the legal opportunities and risks associated with that. The other pending litigation is the EPA's position. So we are waiting to hear from EPA about that litigation. And of course, you will likely know as soon as we do. But meanwhile, the EPA does continue its oversight and accountability, which includes a lot of federal regulatory and funding oversight in Pennsylvania. So with that, I'll conclude my response.
I think you got through all the questions.
Yes,
Okay.
thank you.
Okay. I unfortunately have a hard stop in about 10 minutes, but I'm going to go Senator Selling, then Senator Jackson.
Thank you. And thank you for the report and all the information. I got one thing in question. I got a question, but I got a statement just to make. I'm hoping that our other state partners continue on working with us. It's important that not just Pennsylvania, but New York work with us, as well as I believe Delaware and Virginia, our partners are so important to us and making sure that we're all working together through not just our state, which is great, but our federal partners. And I hope that's ongoing because it's important to the Chesapeake Bay, as I know the chair knows that, and that's important to us. There is one thing that the city of Baltimore and Baltimore County is working together now. And we do have a bill. It's the Baltimore Regional Water Governance Task Force. It's a task force that they're looking into to work together. We want to do all that we can to work with the city of Baltimore. And as you know, most of you know, I neighbor the city of Baltimore. And we have tried to work as much as we can with the city to make sure that we can work together, knowing that the plan is in Baltimore County. And there's a responsibility also for Baltimore County, but for the city of Baltimore more than anyone else, as we know. And so I don't know if you know anything about the bill that's in rules. We're hoping we can get it out because we do have a city representative and a county on both the House and the Senate. And we're doing all that we can to make sure we put the right people in place for this task force. I don't know if you know anything about that.
Senator, I'll say that the new secretary has been engaged from the beginning on that bill.
Good.
Yes.
Well, thank you. We want to do all we can to work together with the administration, but also with the county and the city. And if we can do that and we can do more, we appreciate that. So
We
thank you,
look
Madam
forward
Chair.
to it. We look forward to working with you.
Senator Jackson.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I'll be brief, and thank you all for answering the questions. Ms. Dorsey or Deputy Secretary Dorsey, if you could, not today, but we have, because we're going to be delving deeper with the agencies, and I have a pending meeting with the Secretary. A few years back, the legislature kind of took the gloves off on counties, stormwater management. I think it was, term rain tax or something, whatever was going on back then, right? Could you kind of give us some sort of assessment, update, forecast, or what you all have seen with the individual counties and their progress or lack thereof? I think this committee would be probably, I know I would be interested in how we look over the last few years. So, and you can provide that information to the committee if you like.
We can provide that. If briefly, I would just comment, since you mentioned Prince George's County, I think Prince George's County approached their stormwater permit from the perspective of one of their top priorities was flooding. And that was a great partnership opportunity because we were able to say, great, this stormwater permit, which obviously has Chesapeake Bay goals embedded in it, is a wonderful tool to address local flooding. So how do we partner with a local government to achieve local priorities using existing tools? And that's one approach that's been very effective as we move forward.
Very good. All right, look forward to it. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Senator, because you teed up, I wrote down here co-benefits and I think Deputy Secretary, that's what you're referring to. And I know Secretary Kurtz, your focus as well. Everybody is focused on these co-benefits. Let's not just achieve addressing stormwater. Let's look at flooding. Let's look at tree canopy. Let's look at all these things together. So I appreciate that focus and look forward to hearing more about co-benefits in your budgets. One more editorial comment, serving on the Bay Commission, when we were presented with the whip, the latest whip from Maryland, the odd thing was that the previous administration claimed that we could achieve our whip goals without any new dedicated funding outside of what was already there. I'll tell you, Senator Gazzoni and I raised our eyebrows on that one. And so I'm just putting that to the three of you that that math doesn't seem to necessarily work. And so we expect to work with you to figure that out. I hope to have one-on-one meetings with all of your agencies before budgets. I know AG we have tomorrow, so maybe you can forgive the secretary for being out sick, but I'd love to sit down and really dig in, particularly with the opportunities with the upcoming federal farm bill. But I'd also love in each of your budgets, if you could touch on, please, the unprecedented and incredible opportunity we have with the increased federal funding when it comes to this sector. So this subcommittee is very interested in hearing your plans. We know that those are just, preliminary at the moment, and that a lot of this funding will be competitive, but the subcommittee would be very interested in hearing your plans moving forward. And with that, I know Secretary Kurtz, there was one issue that you probably want to comment on. You did in your testimony, and if you'd like to close out with that. I'm sorry, the recommended budget action.
Oh, yes. Um, Thank you very much for prompting me to do that. Yes, we would very much appreciate reconsideration of holding the $200,000 for our agencies to continue to work on the Chesapeake Bay. Yeah, thank you very much for that. And it shows a great partnership here that we're really getting started. So,
Shows that I read the testimony in advance.
yeah.
So I really look forward to working with all three of your departments, as I said, and looking forward to digging very deeply into these budgets and our shared goals.
Great.
With that, thank you very much, Mr. Gray. Subcommittee, just over time. We will see you tomorrow. We have 3 budgets tomorrow. We'll be here at 11:30. We're hearing Department of Ag, Office of the State Prosecutor, and MDOT Secretary's Office. With that, we're adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you.